everybody. I think we're finally live. It's about 7:05. We're so glad to be here with you all this evening. I hope somebody's here with us, checking us out on Halloween Eve. So, in where I'm from in Baltimore, this is known as moving night. And
what is it?
It's called moving night. And it's usually there's mischief that happens and the kids are moving things. Sometimes people's cars wind up on their porch, that kind of thing, moving night. So what we're hoping that what we're going to move tonight is people in a call to action. We hope that parents will feel inspired to take just a little bit of action to hopefully make our school system a better place for our children. So that's your task we're going to leave you with tonight. But of the three of us, and I guess I should introduce us, I'm Susan Majors, so nice to be with you.
Stephanie Lake.
And Brody. Hi, I'm Sue Meminger. Thanks for joining us. And I see Annie's joining us. Hi, Annie.
Yay, so we're glad to have all of you ladies. Sometimes we get a gentleman that pops in, but it's usually moms that are hanging with us in the evenings. Make sure you all have your glass of wine. It is Friday night at 7 o'clock. It's after 5. It's time.
We didn't give you time. We didn't give you time to pour a glass of wine, did we, Steph?
No, but I'm good. In spirit, I will share a glass of wine with everyone.
Okay. Well, when we're done, you can have yours. You'll have earned it then. So. But tonight we really want to talk about public schools. And, the three of us, and I think I can speak for us, and if I say something you guys don't agree with, I know that you won't be shy about telling me. No, never. But we are public school supporters. We believe that the great equalizer in our country are the public schools. And every child has the entitlement, the right to a free and appropriate public education and a high quality public education. And it shouldn't matter what neighborhood you live in or what school you go to, that you don't get access to good teachers and quality curriculum and a safe environment and all of the things that come with making public schools what we expect them to be in this country. But what we have seen over the last 2 decades is the dismantling or the attempted dismantling of our public schools, funding being diverted, and the rise of scholarships and vouchers and corporate charter schools and differences in accountability between the systems that all get funded by our state and federal dollars. And, we watch our teachers now in this pandemic struggling to do all that is being asked of them with technology systems that don't necessarily work every day, or kids that are at home because everybody's remote or their families have elected to be remote, and they don't have connectivity, or it's spotty, or the assignment can't be turned in. So it's not equal. We're struggling as a public school system nationally, not just state by state or county by county, but as a nation, because we're hearing from parents from all over the country that are facing similar challenges, in particularly this school year. But as we've watched this dismantling of our school system, the pandemic response is speeding up the process. And all of the cracks that we have all been watching for years and years and years are just being laid bare. And the cracks are widening every day. It seems like there's a new something that we learn, that somebody has seen a crack, and somebody who would like to profit off of public education is trying to fill it. And so we have to be vigilant, because sometimes the adults in education aren't necessarily working in the best interest of the children and education. And I'm not talking about teachers. I'm talking about funding sources. I'm talking about products. And there is a large pot of money that comes with education, and everybody seems to want a piece of it. From standardized testing to textbooks to digital remediation, intervention, law enforcement, new curriculum packages, tutoring, apps, progress monitoring. And the new thing with this digital learning environment we're in are learning management systems. And they have lots of names. There's Schoology and Blackboard and probably a bunch more that I don't know the names of. But they are the latest layer of thing we've rushed in and spent millions of dollars on. And it's supposed to be the tool that fixes everything. And I don't know about the people who are watching this, but the parents I've talked to, it doesn't matter which platform the school system has picked, it doesn't work seamlessly.
Well, parents and teachers. It's not just the parents that are frustrated. Teachers are just as frustrated, and they weren't given training or support. And now the environment they're being asked to work within has, exponentially increased. But you have a kid trying to log into remote from your classroom and something doesn't work. These school districts didn't put anything in place to help these families or help these teachers. So it's just a nightmare. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're not. I mean, that's the issue that we see happening right now is, the pandemic caused us to all have to put very quick solutions in place that maybe weren't completely thought through. And, technology used to be an internal process for school districts. And now the tech department has customers everywhere. And possibly
even private industry had the same amount of time. All this started in March. So there was lots of time to try to figure out some kind of a plan, back to, you shouldn't wait until the second week in August to figure out what you're going to do the fourth week in August and train all these people and not have a support mechanism or a platform to field these help desk calls when these people are frustrated. I mean, it's kind of like a intentional, way you can then blame the other guy like this. But
well, I would say that the other pieces is government doesn't function like a private business, and the decision-making functions are not as quick to adapt. It's like turning a cruise ship.
That's what I was going to say. What I find most encouraging, or what I feel positive about, because I have been negative since March. So what I've sort of turned the corner on how I feel, because we as SPED parents or advocates of SPED people have seen the hard way to the system moves, right? It's slow, it's big, it's clumsy, it's out of date, it's not really kid focused, and it's frustrating, and getting the smallest thing done seems almost impossible sometimes. And you take ration and reason and you throw it out the window, right? And I have been telling these stories of my experiences being a special ed attorney for years, and people are like, that never happens. You're just a crazy person. That makes no sense. That would never happen. And I feel like what's happened with the pandemic and us having to, I feel like everyone now believes me. Everyone now believes it's big, right? It's big, it's hard. Mm-hmm. Things that make rational sense should just be done. What do you mean we don't have the money? Of course we have the money. And all of these things that we as SPED people have been saying for 20 years, people now believe us. So it's the first time that I've ever seen us all on the same page, all parents, whether you have a kid, a gifted kid, an old kid, a young kid, we're all on the same page. So for me, it's exciting because it's the first time we can all join together, no matter what our kids' deficits, whatever their gifts are, whatever it is, we all are saying the same thing finally now. So if we join together with one voice, I do believe this is the first time that I've ever felt this way, that there's a real opportunity to make changes in priorities of what we're funding or make fundamental changes in how the system's working. Like, do we get rid of standardized testing? How do we measure the gifts of a child as opposed to deficits of the child? Like, I feel like this is the first time ever we've had a real opportunity to do that in a way that everyone's going to believe us, because they all are seeing all the cracks in the system are now being seen with light shining through them for the first time ever in my professional career. So I'm like excited about the possibility of maybe making some fundamental changes possibly in the system, as opposed to dismantling the public school system, which I agree there's been an attack on the public school system for decades now. And we can't let our public systems go private. It doesn't work. I will fight to the death to stop that from happening. I'm such a proponent of public school system, and I'm excited by the fact that maybe we can have real change because everyone sees what we've been seeing for decades. And I'm going to put myself on mute because I'm having a pizza emergency, because like everyone else, I'm balancing 1,000 things all at once. Now listen.
What's a pizza emergency? Is that like the pizza man's at your door?
Yeah, I mean, but
pizza.
Yeah, I mean, this is the life we're all living. You know, we're doing 14 things at the same time, Zooming on a Friday night and trying to feed 2 kids at the same time.
That must be her garage school behind her. We'll have to ask when she comes back.
It is. It's garage school. And you know, that's the other thing parents are facing is, you know, trying to set up a place in your house for school to happen when your kid isn't in brick and mortar. So, and I agree with Stephanie, out of chaos, the status quo gets thrown out the window, and it creates opportunities that we never thought might open when chaos wasn't ensuing.
If we have the right leadership and if we have the united voice, that could create opportunities. That's what needs to happen. If we have the wrong leadership, or if we have the crazy narrative that some would like us to believe, that's not going to create opportunities. So I think being informed is a critical piece of this as well.
Yeah, and I think finally I really truly believe people are like, that makes no sense. Why are we doing things that way? And we're like, yes, we agree. I agree. So like even how we're spending our money, which, you know, even if it does not, public schools, I agree, do not run like a corporation. And I'm okay with that. Maybe people wanted to run more like a corporation. I'm maybe okay with that too, as long as the kid is the product, right? As long as we're centered on the kid. But no matter how we're funding things, everyone now knows it's backwards. It's not working. It's not putting the money where the kids need it the most, that benefits the most children. And so even if we just change how we fund things or what we prioritize in funding, I think would make a big difference for all students. So
and stakeholder voices in those decisions. You know, lots of times those decisions of where we spend our dollars are made by very small groups of people who aren't teachers, aren't parents necessarily. Sometimes it's at the legislative level, sometimes at the school board level, sometimes it's made by people, influenced by people who haven't been in classrooms for years and years and years.
Or they have a financial stake in that product or that company being selected, and all of those things we're seeing everywhere. Those also always existed in the school system. And now it's just sort of all coming to light. And so I'm feeling hopeful. I don't know if I should be, but I'm feeling a little bit like, okay, what can we do with this opportunity we've been handed? How do we organize? What do we tell people to be doing?
And so before we get to kind of a call to action, because that's how we're going to end tonight. So everybody who's watching or who watches the rerun, if you're not watching us live, at the end of this, make sure you have your pen, because you'll have a to-do list, a short one. You can pick. You don't have to do them all, but we like overachievers. So But the other piece we really want to talk about tonight is, so we're spending all this money and we have these cracks that we know are in the system in how we're spending the money. But the result of not spending our money well, the most disturbing part that I think the three of us are seeing from the calls we're getting from families and the work that we do is, and the statistics that we've reviewed, is that we have a lot of children. And I mean a lot. It's not just like a couple of special ed kids. Not that any of our kids should not be important, but we're talking large numbers of children who can't read and can't write and struggle with doing math. And there does not seem to be the support for the faculty, the staff, or the students to give them the professional development, the tools, the resources they need in order to remediate kids who don't learn the way it's being taught.
And there's no sense of urgency. No sense of urgency. Because if we can just give them a good grade, we can promote them to the next grade, and then they aren't my kids anymore this year.
Well, I also think people just don't know that you can graduate with a regular diploma getting all D's. So you can have like a 1.0 graduate. Like, you don't actually have to show any knowledge or mastery of any skills to graduate. And I think I just don't think you know until you dig down into the depths of it that can happen. Everyone, I think, assumes, oh, you're passed from grade to grade, you now have some sense of knowledge. Now, maybe there's a spectrum of the knowledge you gain. Some will gain more, some will gain less, but everyone's gaining knowledge. And when I digged into the numbers and the facts on the ground, there really can be kids that get passed grade to grade to grade with D's who really aren't gaining any knowledge as they graduate from high school.
But even scarier than that, and that's horrible, but scarier than that for me are the students who are getting A's and get to high school and can't read at a fourth grade level. You know, I have a family I'm working with, and it's a middle school kid, and she's getting A's, but we just did an assessment, and her skill level is that of a first grader. And she's in gen ed classes.
Okay.
And she's got, special ed support. And not that we want the child to feel horrible and get terrible grades. That's not my point. But if you can only do your skill level is only at first grade, and you're in a gen ed middle school math class, how do you earn an A and get promoted to the next grade and the next grade and the next grade? And
well, you know how, Susan, we've seen it time and time again. They could fail every quiz, they can fail every test, but they get A's on employability, and they get A's on homework because it's completion, it's not accuracy, and they get A's on, I don't know, bringing in whatever, because there's so much pressure on these teachers to have your kids have good grades because the teacher's grade depends on that. And we hear time and time again from administrators that talk to us off the record that these kids will get to middle school without having the skills that they need to be in a middle school class. And the middle school teachers are like, I don't know how to remediate this. I don't know how to teach elementary school. All this stuff should have been taught in elementary school. By the time they get to middle school, they don't have the skills they need. So what are these teachers supposed to do with them? And we can bring it to everybody's attention, but there is no sense of urgency to fix it, because that would mean somebody would have to say, you're right, we've got a problem. And nobody's willing to say that.
But also practically, I don't know what you do. So the schools don't have reading rooms anymore. They don't have reading teachers anymore. They don't have a system set up to remediate a kid other than to stick them on a computer program, like in a study hall or a remediation class. And that computer system is really not going to close the gap. And so not only are the teachers not have the skill level, but there's also no system in place to catch a kid and then close the gap on a kid who can learn if they're just taught the way that kid needs to be taught. So we're not talking about kids who are not ever going to learn. I think you're talking about a kid who has the capacity to learn just needs to maybe be taught in a different setting or a different way. And the system's not designed as they, especially as they age, to then give that kid the time and the method that they need to learn.
But it was all by design. Yeah, I mean, these companies knew many moons ago that we were going to remediate and try to close the gaps using these great new software systems that they were going to do. So for remediation programs, that's what they were going to do because it was most cost effective. And these schools, these companies that were selling these software companies, in my opinion, without any evidence that they really worked. And they invested millions and millions of dollars. I could rattle off names off the top of my head of millions and millions of dollars of software that school districts just within our Tri-County area bought. And then they went bankrupt or they didn't work right or something else happened. And we're talking about a lot of money and they're not effective. And instead of these school board members going, all right, you guys made a mistake, we need to pivot, they just throw more money at it and pretend it wasn't a mistake. And that's where I think, God, we need a change because, I don't care what people's legacies are. If you haven't done the right thing, you need to fix it before you leave.
Well, and so back to the children, 2 points to make. The first is less than 2% of children statistically have a cognitive disability. I think that that's really important to remember because, we know that students that have a cognitive disability may learn at a slower rate or need information that's modified for what they're expected to master or in order to be able to graduate. And that is a perfectly reasonable expectation that a student with a cognitive disability has a lower expectation and that we really focus in on their strengths and preparing them for adulthood, that the skills that we teach are so that they can maximize the independence, whatever that looks like for that individual child. But the vast majority of students that we get into our school system are very capable of learning. And it's just the way that they take information in and the way that they can demonstrate mastery may not be the same across the board. We may need to teach differently. When I think of students with learning disabilities, they need a very explicit, systematic, structured way of having information presented to them. And they need an accommodation that allows them to demonstrate their mastery of that subject in a different way. But it doesn't mean that they can't be held to the same standards and learn the same competencies as every other student that's going through the system. But our schools are not flexible, and we do not have the ability often or the knowledge, it seems, to work with students that learn differently.
So this I would back a little bit. I do think we have the knowledge and I do think we have the capability. We're just choosing not to prioritize that or choosing to spend our money or do our training on that. I think it's a choice that we have made over the decades of how to educate kids.
Well, I guess my point is the knowledge exists. The knowledge is out there. I mean, we've known for years and years and years how to teach students with learning disabilities. We have even a great body of knowledge now about kids on the autism spectrum. When my girl was starting school, she was the first kid many teachers saw with the autism spectrum. But now she's approaching 30 very quickly. And, I would imagine almost every teacher out there has had a child on the spectrum in their classroom at this point. But when I say we don't have the knowledge, what I'm talking about is the college prep that teachers receive and the professional development that we are investing in. We are not giving teachers the knowledge that they need for our children who learn differently. And because I am seeing that all the time, I can get whatever written on an IEP, but if there is nobody trained to implement it, what does it mean?
And now with this pandemic, what we're seeing is what we saw in districts many years ago with the financial crisis. So much cheaper to hire a long-term sub than to hire a real teacher. So the narrative is, oh my gosh, there's a teacher shortage. We can't find teachers. Well, that's not true. They can find teachers. I know teachers that have applied for positions that have been filled with long-term subs, and it's a financial decision. And that is just not the right thing to do. The focus should be, again, on kids in classrooms. If you've got financial issues, make that be transparent. Let's talk about it. Let's work it out. But don't penalize kids and not give them teachers and not tell the truth about why you can't find a teacher for a classroom.
Well, and I think especially in Florida, and this may not be true across the country, but in Florida, every school district spends millions and millions of dollars on law enforcement. And the question is, why? We know why. We have a law that requires it. So do we look at that law now that we don't know if do we really need that much law enforcement funding or that much education funding going out for law enforcement? I think that is a conversation Florida really needs to have.
Was the funding increased stuff? Did they increase funding at the legislative level, or was funding removed from classrooms to fund law enforcement?
So it's the education budget. And so the budget gets distributed out for certain priorities. And one of the priorities is law enforcement because it's mandated by state law now. So while there was funding added by the legislature to fund some of it, it's certainly pulling funds that could otherwise be used for other stuff. Or we could take all that money they added for law enforcement and use it towards education, in my opinion.
Well, and we know from a discipline perspective, if we had children with less frustration in the classroom because their education needs were being met, we would have, a reduction on the discipline side. Now, it wouldn't solve every problem because certainly kids come from families who have lots of traumas and needs that are beyond what the school can remediate. But if we spent maybe a little bit more money on social services and meeting some of those crisis needs of kids, and we did a better job meeting their academic needs, then our need for law enforcement would decrease. Yes. So it's all about where we prioritize how we spend our dollars. And certainly increasing dollars, for education is always, when you're at the bottom of the heap for states across the country of what we spend on education, that there's always that conversation about, do we spend enough? But if we're not spending it well, adding more to it isn't necessarily going to solve anything.
Right, and we all know the earlier and there's, like you said, decades of knowledge now on this issue, the earlier we intervene, whether it's behavior or reading, any of these skills, the earlier we catch it, the earlier we intervene, the less money, the less time, the less investment it would take to bridge those gaps if there are any.
Well, and even throughout the country, we see the same systemic issues. We see kids that aren't educated appropriately in elementary school. They go to middle school, they get passed along, they go to high school, they become behavior issues. Then, it's the trend we see throughout the country. We're going to discipline, we're going to put these kids in second chance schools. The numbers are the same. Some of these some of these states that spend far more on education funding have abysmal numbers just like we do as far as outcomes and proficiency. So there is no correlation, in my opinion, between dollars being spent and outcomes. There's no correlation as far as, the only correlation I can see is when we talk to people in New Jersey, New York, Michigan, California, Pennsylvania. We hear the same technology companies having the same issues that are being reported in our backyard. So the technology company now that schools are using for local tech, like locally here in Sarasota, our teachers
learning management system.
Concurrent learning, so the kids are in the classroom and they're remote. So these teachers, are having even the classroom kids submit all their work as if they were a remote kid because they can't distribute and manage all that paper and figure it out. And the same bugs are with the same technology throughout the country. And instead of fixing it, reporting it, helping these teachers and get to the bottom of it, these kids are getting penalized. And I could give you 3 or 4 systemic issues that I know about that we hear consistently. And I think, you know, I'm just a mom that gets a lot of phone calls. These districts must be hearing it. And if they wanted to do something about it, they certainly could. So that's where I think there's just not a lot of correlation between dollars and outcomes. And that's even more frustrating.
Well, and I think that there is really good correlation numbers between dropout rates and employability. And so when you have kids graduating who can't read or do basic math, and you have kids who don't graduate or who are pushed out or pushed into the criminal justice system, there is a direct financial impact on your community because these kids are not employable. They don't become productive members of society. There is that correlation, and that correlation's been studied for quite some time, so it's not anything new. And it's only going to get worse because we are not, as a system, fixing, we as a community don't seem to prioritize education as a possible fix to that problem. That communities are losing income every year they graduate a group of kids that are not employable.
And you know, when we look at data, because all of this stuff should be driven by data, the problem that we have is the numbers get manipulated. And so, you know, I always feel like standardized testing is a double-edged sword, because on one hand, I hate all the money we spend and the time we spend teaching to a test and paying for the test and the test materials and the stress that comes with the consequences we've tied to the outcomes of standardized testing. And Florida's certainly been in the forefront of that, you know, since the beginning. But the other side of that is, it is the results of that testing that lets us say, wow, we have a lot of kids that can't read. Boy, we have a lot of kids that can't do math. So if we're not using some measure to make sure that what we're doing is working, I think we're going to be in trouble. So you know, we have to figure out how do we, if we're going to throw standardized testing out, not that anybody has talked about that, frankly, but I know there's a great push from the parent and teacher community to, you know, at least maybe take some of the outcome, the things that are tied to standardized testing away.
The funding.
Right.
Susan, do you think if they took away the funding or the school grades, I know there was a recent push to try to get school grades suspended for the school year. Mm-hmm. They're just all over the place. Do you think if standardized testing was there, but it wasn't tied to funding or promotions or grades, would that make a difference? Because I'm not sure it would fix the problem.
I don't know, but I mean, teacher salaries in Florida are tied to this. It's just a kind of a crazy system. And it really is, I see it's being more demoralizing for teachers that I talk to rather than incentivizing. And to me,
you do hear about them, oh, I couldn't get to that because I had to get this skill that I know they're going to be tested on. And to me, that seems like such a missed opportunity. If the class as a whole is moving in this direction and it's the natural progression of the group, the teacher cuts it off because they have to then turn left to go, you know, down this path.
Right. So I worry about, again, how we use this testing information. But the other side of that for me is we have this thing called growth. And so students in the bottom quartile can show growth. And that's positive for a school's grade. And so the kids aren't actually on meeting standards. They're just showing growth. And you know what? We want to celebrate growth. Believe me, truly. Every time a student moves further than where they were, we should celebrate that. But why do we have A districts? If we're going to give grades to districts, and I'm not sure I think that's a good idea either, but if we're going to, why can you have 30% of your children that can't read in 3rd grade and you earn an A? You know, why can you have subgroups of children who maybe are a minority population, a low socioeconomic group, or a child with disability, and there's nowhere near the proficiency of even 70%, and you can be an A district? That makes no sense to me. So I just don't know why we have data that shows us we need to change something, and yet we aren't changing it because we've agreed that that's okay because it's an A.
Well, and we have data. We have data that we also have rules. If your child doesn't meet the standard of proficiency in 3rd grade and isn't reading, you're supposed to retain them unless they, take some summer school class and pass another test. And if you retain them, I don't know how many calls I got this week from parents who their child was retained and they're not doing anything different this year to teach them anything differently. And when they ask, they're like dumbfounded because they don't know what they're doing differently. And I'm like, read this tab, look at this memo, let's, ask these questions. But we have people that sit in positions and get paid a very nice salary that are responsible for these things, and nobody's holding any of them accountable. It's these poor parents that have to figure out, what am I doing? And again, back to you, Steph, it's like, we're not crazy. All these years we've been having these conversations and we've been saying these things, and now all of a sudden we've got this groundswell of parents going like, I got your number, and this is what they said. And it's like, yeah, this is what we've been,
Well, you can tell it's the end of October because our phones are ringing off the hook.
Yes.
Crazy. Yes. It's
crazy.
It's the pre-Thanksgiving, first quarter's over. Oh my gosh, what the hell is going on?
My kid has 47 Z's and an F.
Right. And so those calls are starting to come in, and it is not. It used to be, we've always, in 20 years, we've always gotten the late October, early November phone calls. But there used to, it felt like these solutions to some of the problems. And I feel like now when parents call me, not that we can't help them work through it, but there are less solutions than there used to be. There is more resistance to the sameness. Like we can't do anything different. We don't have anybody trained in that. We use this. This is what we use. What do you mean?
When that person retired, they took all their knowledge with them, and now we don't have anybody that knows how to do this. We're like,
we don't have reading coaches. We don't have data coaches. We don't have. And so
we can't afford it. We can't afford it. We can't afford it.
Right.
There's no money. Where'd all the money go?
Right. And so we
technology, law enforcement, management systems, all these things.
So we see the deny, the deflect, the dismiss, the defer. We have a whole list of G words that are what parents face when they ask for something that's outside what's already in place that they're using for everybody. And often what we're asking for really doesn't cost much, if anything, but you have to have flexibility. You have to do something different. You have to have people that have knowledge that they're allowed to use.
Right, and the frustrating thing I find, Susan, now is that every answer from the school district is, well, it's COVID. And I'm like, but that's true, it's COVID, but if your child has a seizure in the school building and needs a separate room to recover from that seizure, that has nothing to do with COVID. And they can't deny you that because it's, quote, COVID. So I feel like the school district has always said no, delay, deflect, deny. But it's just now they are empowered and emboldened to be just that more steadfast in their denials and delays and deferments. And so the statements that parents are hearing now are so bizarre and so out of whack. And the, like I said, the good news is though parents without disabilities are also getting these crazy responses to what seems like a very reasonable and rational request for their student.
Yeah.
Getting the same crazy responses as SPED parents are.
And I compare this to the private sector, because in the private sector, you have to have customer satisfaction or your customers are going to go somewhere else. Well, we could talk about that another night, and I understand you guys both saying this is not, you can't compare this to a private sector corporation. However, if a private sector said, oh, it's COVID, they would just lose that customer. Like it's COVID. We all know that. It's been how many months of COVID? Figure it out and figure out how we respond appropriately to that rather than using it as an excuse. And that's the part that I'm like, aren't we over this yet, superintendents? Aren't you over?
Except Sue, that there is, I believe, a push to close down public schools. So yes, the customer goes somewhere else. That's exactly right. They want the customer to go somewhere else. Take your McKay money, go to private school if you can afford it. Let's gut the public school system because then it fails and we can close them and privatize it all. And I think part of this, my hope is because all parents are now feeling the sort of irrational business, lack of rational kid-centered decision making, that we can push back on that. But they want the customer to go somewhere else. I do believe, especially in the state of Florida, that is an intentional thing that is occurring. Because as we know, once you take the voucher money or the scholarship money, they do not have to follow the IDA. They waive the right to the IDA, which is...
And it's cheaper for the districts.
Yep.
Yes. And it's easier. Get rid of the difficult kid, get rid of the behavior kid, having them arrested or pushing them out, making the environmental very hostile for the family and the students. So they leave, they drop out, they get arrested, they take a voucher, they go to...
I've had administrators tell parents outright, go take your McKay and go wherever you want to go.
Yep.
I mean,
yes,
there is... And unfortunately,
and we're seeing that, but Susan, we're seeing that now with all parents, because how many parents want their kids to stay home and make their own pod, to go to private school because the private school is more organized and more certainty. We're seeing it now for all kids.
Yes.
The absurdity of this, I believe.
But you know what's insane to me? The people who are saying that to parents are people who work for the public schools.
Mm-hmm.
Like, from a job security standpoint, like you have to have some of the kids in order to have a job. It's like you're shooting yourself in the foot. And so, I want to say to families, because I know we have people who are watching probably who had enough already and they are homeschooling or they're podding or have taken their McKay and they've gone to private school because...
We don't judge you. I don't judge you. Despite everything I just said, I would do it. I've recommended it to clients that this is the answer for you right now. I wish it wasn't.
Yeah. And certainly I have had families that I've said, if you can find a place that's a better fit for your child and it's within your means, any parent would do that. And so I understand it. But I also, as a parent who had two kids that had special needs, like they did not fit in the mold, I felt very much that part of my role in advocacy, beyond getting their individual needs met, was trying to use my voice at whatever level I could to push the system to improve for kids, for all kids. And somebody said to me once, I was in a meeting, this won't surprise you too. And they said, I was the only mom at the meeting, like everybody else was paid to be there. I'm one of the few people like you guys who sometimes show up and you're the only person not paid. It's not getting a paycheck in the room. But what the guy leading the meeting said to me, well, usually we're trying to get people to come and be on the board. We've never had somebody that just pushed in. And I said, well, this is important. This was a county level committee, not a schools committee. And I said, it's, if citizens don't use their voices to express their concerns in places where decisions are being made, how do you ever have that perspective? And I felt made to feel very welcome on that committee. And I felt like my time, some of it was spent valuably. I mean, you do spend a lot of hours sitting in meetings that you think, why the heck did I just sit here for 2 hours? Nothing happened. But then you get that one little opening where there's a policy that's going to be made and somebody says, hey, what do you think? And I'm like, well, since you asked, here's what I think. And and then it's reflected. Like you see your perspective in the policy that gets passed. And you celebrate those things because wow, it's like it made it all worth it. And small groups of citizens who are impassioned about something absolutely can improve systems. It's the only thing that improves system because the system is designed for status quo.
Well, and I had a teacher, an administrator say to me just this week, I was like, why didn't you say something? And she's like, oh, I wouldn't do that. That would interrupt my job security. And I go, what? She goes, I just hear, I do what they tell me. I never push back and I never ask questions. And this is
They get promoted.
Well, and this is someone who's in charge of their job is to make sure the kids are getting what they need. But if you have someone in that position who doesn't feel comfortable that they can actually have an opinion and ask their boss a question, I don't understand how that gets us, our kids, what they need. My question to her was, why didn't you ask? Oh, I don't ask questions. I just do what I'm told. And I was like, this kid has no shot then. If you're the one in charge of them and you're not willing to ask why or ask a question, that kid is never going to get what they need because that's your job. So I think we need to give teachers and administrators the capacity, the knowledge, the training, the systems to actually advocate for children in a way that doesn't destroy their careers or interrupt their promotions. And we just don't have a system like that now. And I think kids suffer for that.
Well, retaliation is real.
Yeah, we saw that in what we talked about last week. And the other thing, I think parents get so frustrated because Susan, think back, what year was it we would do those parent forums? And so many parents would show up locally. And we had back then our superintendent was this woman, Lori White, and her associate was this man, Scott Lempy. And he walked up and he said, how do you get all these people to show up in a room? I'm like, because they know we're listening to them. And the problem was when the school district invites parents to come and listen, nobody shows up because they feel like, why bother? It's not worth our time.
It's not a two-way conversation. Yeah. You're talked at instead of talked with. Mm-hmm. And we had at one point back, Sue and I have been around a long time trying to have parent involvement. We really feel passionately that involved parents make a better school system. And actually there's a whole body of evidence. There's a woman out of Baltimore named Joyce Epstein, and she at Johns Hopkins that has studied parent involvement for 40 years. And what her research shows is that schools are better, communities are better, the outcomes for kids are better when you have involvement from parents and community members and volunteers. It makes a better school system, but you have to welcome people. I mean, if people show up and they want to help and they constantly feel not welcomed, they're not going to keep beating your door down. Mm-hmm. And COVID has made involvement very difficult because they don't want us on campuses. True.
But I could say this. Our school board meeting was virtual and people were allowed to, was it your school board meeting? Sarasota? I can't remember. Some district had it.
They don't want it to be virtual.
Well, somebody had one. I want to say it's Miami, but I could be wrong. So they had one. It ended up being 6 hours though, because everyone was involved and wanted to participate. So the people, the people, the superintendent and the school board members were like, we are never doing that again. We don't want to have a meeting that lasts 6 hours. And I was like, what? That's the best thing I had heard, that everyone was so involved in asking questions. Now, of course, they were frustrated about remote learning and they were complaining, and that I'm sure that's hard for school board members to listen to, but instead of welcoming the participation from all of those parents, they completely shut it down and said, we'll never do that again. And I was like, what a mistake.
But I have a positive story. So I had a parent that contacted me this week from Pennsylvania, and their school district is some kids brick and mortar and some kids on remote. And they were having a school board meeting, and their policy up there is they allow 2 hours for public comment. So if you get in that 2-hour window, you can speak, and you can register to be for 3 minutes. And then if there's time left, if you show up and you haven't registered, you get 2 minutes. And so, I mean, at least everybody knows the rules walking in the door. But they were going to not allow virtual participation at the school board meeting. You had to show up. And this mom sent a letter saying, you know, you are allowing us to have a choice of brick and mortar and virtual education. If we're a family who can't come to brick and mortar, why would I not have an opportunity to speak to the school board when the technology allows it? Like, it's already being streamed, the streaming's already happened. It's on Zoom. It's easy to do. It's not like there's technical limitations. And so she sent this very compelling letter. Within an hour, she got an email back that they had changed their policy and they had set aside an hour for brick and mortar and an hour for virtual parents to be able to speak. And that was just one mom saying this is wrong and writing a letter and solving a problem. So I want parents who are listening to this and teachers who are listening to this to feel like that your voice matters. You can change things. You might not always get a yes. It might not always happen in an hour. You might make people really mad. I've made people mad on occasion. It's funny, I posted online, somebody put something out about you might not be the most popular. I'm like, if you're the least popular, you get the spot of honor. Because it means you're rattling cages and you're being a disruptor. That's my new word of the day, disruptor. Yeah. And so that is, I think, how we want to end tonight.
No, don't we want to end by telling people what they can do?
Yeah, that's what I'm getting to.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were ending telling everybody to be a disruptor.
Well, I do want them to be a disruptor.
Yeah.
That's the heading on the list.
All right. Another D.
Another D, a different D, RD. If you're getting denial, deflection, deferred, you need to disrupt. And so, but we really want you to feel empowered. Like, this wasn't supposed to be like a bitching session. It's a witching session.
There is a full moon tonight, or almost. It's gorgeous. If you haven't checked out the moon tonight, go outside and check out the moon. It's incredible.
And so on moving night, we want you to get moving. And these are just some suggestions. And you guys, I made a list. And so jump in. And, of course I did. It's bulleted. So, you know, one of the things you can do is join the parent-teacher organization at your child's school. And I know in some schools that's just a fundraising body, but in other schools it is like, if you're a PTA, it is actually an advocacy body. And you're supposed to have a voice in school-based decision making. I know in Baltimore, when I was part of the PTA there at my kids' elementary school, our principal brought all major decisions to the PTA for input before they were made. I mean, they genuinely wanted the parent voice. And so in some schools, I know that is true. And in other schools, it's more about fundraising, but I still feel like you're building relationships with administration. You get those informal opportunities to offer your input. Go to a school board meeting. You know, I wish we could see hands, because I'd like to see how many people who are listening have actually ever even been to a school board meeting. Lots of them have are streamed these days, so you could possibly watch it from the confines of your house.
You can listen to it sometimes, like ours in Miami go on our local national radio station.
Oh, okay.
So you can listen to them if you can't go in person.
And so just like take the time out to really listen to what does your school board do. Speak at a school board meeting. Your voice is so powerful, because I will tell you, if there's not a big issue happening in your community, like right now, everybody's sort of riled up. There's a lot of big issues happening, I think, in a lot of places. But once things start to simmer down, if you go speak at a school board meeting, you could be the only speaker. Like you have a captive audience. Take a group of your mom friends with you. Wear color coordinated t-shirts so they know you're a group. I know one time the autism parents in our local community were really, I forget even what their specific issue was at the time, but we were not being heard. And so a group of moms all wore the same color t-shirt, and they showed up at their kids in show for a 3:30 school board meeting. Let me just tell you, they wanted to know what could they do for us, so we never came back. Because the kids were not cooperative to the rules, and the moms were chasing behind the kids. It was chaos. We'll give you a school board member to come meet with you.
We're going to do a workshop. We're going to do a separate workshop. Let's talk about this. That's a story for another day.
But my point is that we're noticed.
You got to be seen. Yes, you were seen.
So, you know, a group of 10 moms in Florida went to the Florida legislature with bags of Snickers when they were thinking about cutting early intervention many years ago. And their call to action for the legislature was don't snicker at early intervention. And that group of moms was able to save that funding. You know, parents make a difference. Your story is personal. And it's hard to look you in the eye and say, yeah, your 3-year-old that can't walk and talk, we're not going to give you any money for that kid. It's a heartstring story, but it changes policy.
But we all feel that way about our kids, right? All the kids are heartstring kids. So use what we all have in common as a parent
Right. And so my list is write to your legislators at the state level, at the federal level. You know what? This next Congress, education, I believe, is going to be a hot topic. Special education is going to, I think, be on the table.
It's going to be under attack.
It's going to be under attack.
Well, it'll be on the table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The dropping table. Yeah. And so parents need to pay attention. Practice writing to your legislators now. Send them that email. Figure out how the system works. It takes 2 minutes to get in front of your computer and introduce yourself to your congressmen and your senators. And guess what? They count. I mean, literally, they count how many people contact them on an issue. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to be like the most brilliant writer ever. You just need to state your position on an issue and bug their, if you really want to get into this, call and ask for their legislative assistant that handles whatever topic you're passionate about. Get to know that person's name, learn their cell phone number, drive them crazy. Make sure when special education is going to be talked about, they go, oh, Stephanie Langer, we should call her. She knows something about this. I mean, seriously, they look for experts in their community. And so you could be that person.
And many of them have kids, and they're kind of with us saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe what I'm
Now
seeing.
they are. Now they are. Now
Yeah. Yep.
they get it. They all get it now.
Yep.
Yeah. Join an advocacy group in your community or on Facebook. You know, get with a group of people. Join us here at IEP for Parents. We'd love to have you. But there are lots of advocacy groups out there that help parents learn how to use their voice to change policy. And it might be as simple as signing a petition. You know, you can take really small actions that cost you nothing and take very little time, but your collective voices really can change the world that we live in and the world that our children inhabit. So that was my list. Do you guys have other thoughts of what parents could do?
The only other thought I'm thinking I would want to leave people with tonight is this idea of equitable funding across school districts. So every school district, every school is funded by taxpayer dollars, but also by the community they're in. So it's not equitable. So if you're in a poor neighborhood, your school has less funding than if you're in a richer neighborhood. And I think that the inequities of funding have been just laid bare to everyone now that COVID's hit, specifically related to connectivity and technology and even food insecurity. And I really would love to see us talk about, or people, us meaning the community, talk about having a more equitably funded system as opposed to each school being funded by where they're located.
At least some baselines.
Right?
Right.
It's like, because the PTAs in each district in each school can raise money, and yes, you'll have one active PTA that's going to raise more than another. That's okay. Like, that's great. You have a good PTA, you get more money, you get more stuff, but there should be a more equitable baseline starting point for everybody, I think.
I agree. And even in our community here, you know, where we live is relatively affluent. But we have areas that, like every community, that have more money or less. And that, you know, do you get air filters was a hot topic because one school could raise a lot of money and a different school could not. And so is that equitable? And those are questions that communities are grappling with. And again, because we've all been stripped bare by COVID, we're really, those things are, a light is shined on them.
So I think back to the baseline of what we originally were talking about as far as, you know, what is the function of our education system, right? Let's teach kids to read. Let's teach them how to do math. To take back our public schools, don't we have something on the website that talks about join the movement?
We do.
We've got some things coming up that we can't talk about quite yet, but they're kind of like on the brink of being launched. And if you put your email address in there to join the movement, as soon as we've got further information that we can share with you, we would love to have you be part of that with us. Shoot us an email whenever you have a thought or an idea or a concern, and put your email and join the movement. And I think that's what needs to happen to take back our public schools. We need to unite. It can't be how it was years ago where, you know, this faction of people said, you know, well, what we were was a little bit more naive because we allowed the schools to say, oh, we can't do this for you because they want this. And if we do this for you, we can't do that for them. So we can't like have a rerun of that because that was their way that we weren't effective back then when we could have been. And we were a smidgen away from being very effective. Well, we were pretty effective, but, you know, we could have been
More effective.
Yeah. But it's back to the narrative versus the reality. And the more we can stay in constant communication with actual facts and working together collaboratively and not emotionally, you know, using facts and being reasonable, I think that we have an opportunity here. So we would love you to be with us to do that.
And we collective can make change if we choose to. So my call to action is get informed, get involved.
Yep.
Stay with us. We'll try to keep, pull you in for calls to action that we hope will be impactful.
And so I will, our website is www.iep4parents.com. That's where you can join the movement. And of course, we have our Facebook group for parents out there. So if you are a mom or a dad and you're looking particularly for special education content help, join the group. And then we have our Facebook page where lots of you probably, if you're watching us, that's where you're watching us from. And we have just started a YouTube channel. It will have our videos on it. We're becoming a multimedia platform group. And there's only a few of our videos so far. We're working on moving that content, but I'm old and slow. And if I had a teenager that was doing the technology, they'd probably be much quicker. But it will get there eventually. So check us out on YouTube and follow us there. And that is it. Have a wonderful Halloween, trick-or-treating, whatever that looks like digitally in your world these days. I don't have little ones, so I don't know what trick-or-treat will look like in 2020.
Oh, it looks like this. You get in your car and you do a drive-by with like 10 of your other friends, and you're gonna throw bags at the kids while they're all masked up. It's gonna be a drive-by Halloween this year, at least in my world.
Oh, so I can see how many kids I can clock with a Snickers bar.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh, well, that's a different way of doing it.
Yeah.
All right,
We're gonna make the best of it, though. Enjoy
Those pictures of your boys. What are they going to be?
No, they're teenagers. They're like, we don't do costumes.
Oh.
What are you going to be?
Well, I do have my witch's hat.
There you go.
So probably something like that.
What else you got up there?
Oh,
All right.
Well, enjoy your weekend, and we'll be back next week with another topic. Thanks for joining us. Good night.